Okay.
Magandang gabi po mga katipon sa Pilipinas. Ito po ang ating katipunan. Muling sumama sa inyo mga tagapakinig upang magbigay ng mahalagang impormasyon, magbigay liwanag at higit sa lahat makinig sa inyong mga daing at kuro-kuro hinggil sa mga problemang patuloy na nagpapahirap sa ating kalagayan at kabuhayan. Sa susunod na 2 oras, sisikapin po namin ipaliwanag ang iba-ibang bahagi ng ating ekonomiya at ang mga mabibigat pang local and international issues na may malaking epekto sa ating buhay at kinabukasan. Ito po ang inyong katipon na si Butch Valdes, kasama ang aking co-host dito ay si Itos at ang ating pong mga ibang kasamahan na nanonood, mga katipon sa Save the Nation at mga Katipunan Demokratikong Pilipino at iba pang mga organisasyon kasama po natin. Andito po din si Roxanne, ang ating umahawak ng technicals at marami pong ibang makasamahan natin. Kami po dito ay nag-aanyaya sa inyo na makibahagi sa ating talakayan sa pagsusuri ng mga kasalukuyang problema at paghahanap ng kaukulang solusyon. Okay. Andito na po tayo, nasa home stretch na po tayo dito sa napaka-importanting eleksyon na magaganap sa bansang Amerika. The whole world is waiting, sabi nga nila, with bated breath.
Bated breath. Ano yan sa Tagalog, Chairman?
With, ano ba, parang naghihikayos o hindi naghihingalo yung parang basta gigil na excited sila kung bakit dahil dito po ninenervyos dahil nga napaka-importante ang magagampanan ng buong mundo kung isa o yung isa sa kanila ang manalo. Meron mga gustong sumapi dito kay Biden, at ang kaalaman po natin kay Biden sa Democrat Party ay hindi na sikreto sa buong mundo. At siyempre sa bansang Amerika, siya po at ang kanyang partido at ang kanyang administrasyon ay number 1 po, pro-abortion. Alam niyo na po kung ano yung abortion. Ito po yung pagpapatay ng mga bata sa loob pa ng sinapupunan ng kanilang mga ina. At dati, dito sa kalakaran nila, ang abortion is done on the early term, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Pagkatapos, siyempre, nabigyan na sila ng ganitong pagkakataon. Ngayon, itinutulak na nila hanggang late-term abortion. Late-term abortion po, maski na 9 na buwan na po yung bata, ay lalabas na. Ang sabi ng mga Democrat Party, may katungkol o may karapatan. May karapatan pa rin ang mga ina na patayin yung kanilang sariling mga anak na nasa loob pa ng kanilang tiyan, sinapupunan. Now, hindi pa po nahihinto yan. Meron pa pong mga nagtutulak, katulad po ng Vice President candidate ni Biden na sabi na, maski na napanganak na, lumabas na yung bata, meron pa rin karapatan ang ina na patayin yung sarili ng anak. Ito po ang napakabigat. Marami pong ibang mga mabibigat na issues na napakahirap lunukin ng mga ibang mga tao. Pero itong mga nasa Democrat Party ngayon, ang Democrat Party po hindi naman basta-basta masama. Pero itong mga kasalukuyan nandyan ngayon, Ganyan ang kanilang pag-iisip. Di ba?
Yes. We wanted to say na tulad nga na sabi ng chairman, and we've been talking about this po ilang linggo na, siguro 2 months na about this kasi sabi nga natin, it's the most important election in US siguro, in US history right now because it will determine whether the US stays a republic or goes into another form of government. Delikado po. Hindi po kami American citizens, so we will not vote. But we see what's going on. We are students of history po. Yun po ang pinag-aaralan namin parati. And the way the Democratic leadership po, headed by Biden and Kamala po, they are dangerous people. Delikado po ang mga tao to. Like Obama was a dangerous person. Ito po, delikado. Hindi lang sa Amerika. Of course, initial. But where America goes, the rest of the world will follow. Delikado po yan. So, ang choice po natin is very, very... choice po ng mga Amerikano ngayon, US citizens. And there is a big group of Filipinos for Trump there now. So, hindi ko alam, either Republican ka or Democrat. But it is very, very important po that President Trump is given the chance to continue his policies of no regime change, no endless wars, no pro-life policies, and patriotic respect for the sovereign nation states, hindi lang sa Amerika, but around the world. Yan ang policy ni Trump.
May kita niyo po talagang opposite sila no? Kanya ako minention earlier yung dito sa abortion, no? Opposite Etong mga iba, etong kila Biden, gusto nila pwedeng magkaroon ng karapatan ng ina na patayin yung sarili ng anak. Ngayon, dito naman sa mga Republicans, or specifically si Trump, no? Si Trump kasi si Trump, hindi yan talagang Republican Trump is just a person, no?
Yeah.
Ang sinasabi nga, hindi. He is specifically pro-life. Walang idea about, hindi siya sasabi maski any kind of abortion. No? Yun ang sinasabi niya.
Period.
Completely opposite. Yung isa, pwedeng patayin hanggang napanganak na. Yung isa, pro-life. No abortion. No? Whatever the circumstances, no abortion. Etong isa. And sabi nila, this is the most pro-life president ever that had run for office.
Tsaka hindi lang siya po. Si Trump, yung vice president niya, yung mga anak niya, cabinet members, pati yung inappoint niyang bagong Supreme Court, Associate Justice na si Amy Coney Barrett, pro-life lahat. At kahit anong pasikot-sikot ng ating mga media, yung mga local media na kumukuha lang ng foreign news, na hindi nag-iisip, hindi nag-research, nilalabas lang. Tsaka yung mga tinasabi nilang fact checkers like Rappler tsaka Facebook, sinisiraan nila to. Bakit? Ayaw ba nila ng pro-life? Ayaw po ba nila ng wala ng gera? Kailangan ba suportahan bakit ayaw niyo si Trump? 'Di ba? So siguro before we have our guest later, no, but we can show some videos, couple of videos first. First video po is yung last video, Roxy, yung 1 minute, yung Trump train. The third video. So we'll show a video by our LaRouche organization. Papakita dito na kasi po si Trump umiikot sa US yan, nagrarally yan, nangangampanya, pero hindi pinapakita sa media kung gaano karaming tao ang pupunta. Sobrang daming tao po ang pupunta. Kahit pinipigilan na sila ng mga kalaban na to win states. He goes to 5 different places a day.
In one day. Kung ang pinapanood nyo lang, CNN, maski na ibang Fox News, pati na yung CNBC, yung mga ABC.
Tsaka dito, GMA, TV5, wala silang
kung yun lang ang pinapanood nyo, hindi nyo makikita yung tunay na kalawakan ng pagsuporta kay Trump ng mamamayang sa Amerika. You have to go to YouTube, no? You have to go to YouTube in order to be able to see, kasi meron mga ibang mga television stations, I call them fringe networks, no? But they show the whole thing. They show Trump and they show the people. They do the same thing with Biden. Kanya lang, pagdating kay Biden, pinipigil sila na ipakita yung tao. Kasi po, walang tao.
Wala pong tao. But you can easily sa YouTube po, sa Google, sabihin mo, Trump rally. Tapos may lalabas na lahat ng searches. Tignan nyo po, tapos panoorin nyo. Ito, a report on that. Short report by the LaRouche PAC. Sige.
All over the country, Trump supporters are organizing themselves. They are not the very rich. They are the working and middle classes of all races, creeds, and identities. They are the people who make this country work. And the media has shunned these events, terrified to report them. This has been going on for months. When one or two organic leaders in each community take it upon themselves to contact the local newspaper or radio stations and advertise to their Facebook groups to go set up Trump train parades of vehicles. Now it's begun to break through the national media in an article in the Washington Examiner by Brian York. York was shocked at the sheer magnitude of these events involving thousands. These citizens are coming out because they know that Biden's media army is intent on terrifying people, making everyone think that they're all by themselves, when in reality, those standing with the president are surrounded by an army of people who think the same. Now, they're even going into areas once claimed by Obama and Biden, New York and its suburbs, California and its suburbs. We can have a united country, because the reality is, we are many, and they are few. The opposite is just an optical illusion created by would-be magicians who seek to blind us of our own power. The many just have to show.
Nabitin? Okay. Anyway, that goes to show, ito po yung from our friends at LaRouche, no? It's showing the different areas po na madami talagang tao nagpupunta sa mga rally ni Trump.
Nakakatuwa nga, kung nahuli nyo yung video, dun sa bandang huli, napatawa ako dahil may malaking blue flag doon. Nakalagay, Phil-Ams for Trump. Phil-Ams for Trump.
Yes.
Karamihan yata po ng mga mamayang mga Pilipino na nakatira doon at bumoboto na sa Amerika. Ang balita ko, they are mostly Republicans, no?
Yeah.
At talagang ito pa naman yung mga grupong talagang ayaw na ayaw sa abortion. So malakas ang kampanya.
Yeah.
At itong pagpapaliwanag ng reporter kanina ng LaRouche, no? Sabi na, unprecedented, no? Tsaka completely yung hindi man malapit yung mga ang dami ng tao na sumusuporta sa kay Biden at hindi man lamang ng konti o ganyan. Hindi po. Talagang sobra yung kay Trump, no? At yung kay Biden talagang linalangaw. Kanya ang kanilang kampanya kay Trump, mali siya sa COVID kasi iniimbita niya daw lahat ng tao.
Magkakasakit daw silang lahat.
Magkakasakit silang lahat. Iniimbita niya lahat sa rally. No? Dahil sila, imbita sa rally, walang pumupunta.
Walang gustong pumunta.
Kanya ginawa nila, kunwari, masama yung ginagawa ni Trump dahil piniimbita niya yung mga tao para magkasakit daw. No? Yan ang kanilang twist na ginagawa.
Yan yung sabi sa report nga. Para silang magician. Ano ba? Magician sa Tagalog.
Salamangkero.
Salamangkero. O, di ba? Parang sinasabi nila, ito yung si Biden, maraming suporta. Pero wag na kayong tumingin kay Trump. Kasi konti lang rin yung tao, talo si Trump. Remember po, ang suporta po ni Trump ngayon, siguro 3 times as much, if not more, than in 2016.
Tatandaan niyo po yung 2016 rallies niya, punong-puno ng tao. Ngayon daw, even 3 times more. At pumapasok po siya sa mga lugar na supposedly hawak ng mga Democrats.
Kalaban.
Punong-punong tao yung kanyang mga rally.
Minsan, sa isang lugar, sa Minnesota nga, doon nag-umpisa yung mga Black Lives Matter tsaka Antifa ng gulo. Pinigilan po siya. Sabi ng gobernador ng Minnesota,
Mga tao.
250 lang ang pwede mong tanggapin sa loob. Kasi COVID, delikado. Right? Pero ang nasa labas, mga 5,000, 6,000 people. Nasa labas ng venue. So, ang ginawa ni Trump, nag-speech siya, pero pagkatapos yun, lumabas siya. At sumama siya sa mga tao sa labas.
Nakipagkamayan siya doon. No? Kasi po, ang governor may kapangyarihan sa peace and order, may kapangyarihan siya sa ganyan. Tapos kung papasok ang presidente, parang hindi siya tiga doon, no? At nasa poder ng gobernador doon sa state. Kung ano ipapairal niyang batas, no? Ang excuse niya COVID tsaka peace and order, no? Kaya sabi niya, pag pupunta ka dito, President Trump, ang pwede mo lang taong kausapin dyan ay 250 dahil hindi namin papayagan yung mga tao mag-attend dito sa rally mo. No? Doon sila sa kalye kung gusto nilang mag-abang sa'yo, pero hindi sila pwedeng pumunta sa rally mo. Ganyan ang utos.
Yeah.
Ngayon, pwede bang gawin yon? Presidente yan? Sa Amerika po, meron silang ganyan at sinusundan nila itong mga rules na ganito.
Local.
Kanya garapal lang ginawa po ng governor ng Minnesota dahil sa mga ibang lugar, no, maski na pinipigil nila si Trump kasi Democrat yung governor, hindi nila mapigil. Talagang nagpupumilit yung mga tao.
Yeah.
Dito medyo na hawakan nila yung mga tao para wag pumunta.
Yeah.
No?
Pero pumunta pa rin. Nasa labas pa rin. Hindi pumayag. So, hindi sila pumayag na nasa bahay lang sila. Lalabas sila at papakita yung supporter nila kay Trump. Lahat buong Amerika po, yan ang nangyayari. Tapos nakikita nyo, in Pennsylvania, yung pinaka-recent rally, kung gusto nyo pong makita kung gaano karaming tao na hindi pinapakita ng mga news dito at dyan sa Amerika rin. Punta lang kayo sa YouTube, sabihin nyo, Trump, Pennsylvania rally. At makikita nyo sa daming tao. We have another video from our friend si Liz Wheeler. She has some report also on Biden. Kung ano yung hindi sinasabi sa atin tungkol kay Biden at pinapagwapo po nila sa inyo. Pero maraming hindi nyo nalalaman about him na hindi nila pinapalabas sa mga news. So, tignan muna natin.
We are now just days away from 2020 presidential elections, and Joe Biden is still hiding in his basement. Joe Biden refuses to face the American people or answer any substantive questions from the press. In Biden's defense, the mainstream media also refuses to ask Joe Biden any substantive questions. Why is that? It's because the mainstream media and even the Democratic strategists running Biden's campaign don't want you to know the truth about Joe Biden. So today, I bring you 7 things the mainstream media refuses to report about Joe Biden. Number 1, Joe Biden says he will impose government-mandated lockdowns again and a national mask mandate in the face of COVID-19. No consideration to the millions and millions of people unemployed or the thousands and thousands of businesses who have been forced to close permanently thanks to the government-mandated lockdowns. Biden says he will do that all over again. No wonder the mainstream media doesn't want you to know about that. Number 2, Joe Biden will raise your taxes. I know. Biden says he won't raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year. But 5 independent analyses of Biden's tax plan found that the plan will increase taxes on people of all income levels. And that doesn't even count, by the way, the Obamacare tax and the carbon tax that will increase your taxes that Biden supports, but oddly did not include in his tax plan. No wonder the mainstream media doesn't want you to know about that. Number 3, Joe Biden refuses to deny that the Hunter Biden laptop and the emails showing Hunter Biden profiting from Joe Biden's position as VP and even potentially holding money from the Chinese for Joe Biden are real. Biden will not say, no, those aren't real, and that's not true. Biden just refuses. Does that mean Joe Biden is a corrupt politician who used his position of power to enrich his family, allowing his son to take money from the Ukraine, from Russia, from China, despite the fact that this puts U.S. national security at risk? No wonder the mainstream media doesn't want you to know about that. Number 4, Joe Biden says he will ban oil. Can you imagine? Biden said in the presidential debate that he wants restaurants to put plexiglass in between every customer if the restaurants want to open in the face of COVID-19. Joe Biden also says he would ban oil. Does Biden understand that plexiglass is made from oil? So are plastics and fertilizers and pesticides and medicine and clothing and just about everything else we use in our daily life, including things that keep people alive and safe and healthy and well. No wonder the mainstream media doesn't want you to know that. Number 5, Joe Biden surrounds himself with radical leftists like Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Cuomo, and AOC. And what's worse, Biden is not the moderate he pretends to be. Biden actually embraces the radical leftist policies of these radical leftists, like a Green New Deal and astronomically high taxes, abortion on demand, wealth taxes, socialist-style healthcare systems. No wonder the mainstream media doesn't want you to know about that. Number 6, Joe Biden has a history of racial insults, telling black people, for example, if they don't vote for him, then they ain't black, calling all black voters a monolith, telling black Americans they'll be put back in chains if they don't vote the way Biden wants them to vote, peddling false racial narratives about police-involved shootings in order to gin up racial divide to try to get himself votes. This on the heels of his past history of giving the eulogy at the funeral of a KKK member. No wonder the mainstream media doesn't want you to know that. Number 7, Joe Biden supports abortion up until the moment of birth. He will also ban charter schools, and he thinks 8-year-olds should be able to choose to be transgender if they want to be. The vast, vast majority of the American people, Republican and Democrat, oppose all those things that Joe Biden supports. No wonder the mainstream media doesn't want you to know that. Since the mainstream media refuses to report any of that to you, I will.
Yeah, I think she summed it up.
Pretty clear, di
Pretty
ba?
clear, no?
Kung bakit siya ngayon hindi gaanong lumalabas tsaka hindi naghaharap sa media. Pwede siyang lumabas ng sandali kung meron silang rally, pero wala naman question and answer dun eh. No? So yung ayaw niyang humarap sa media, yung media din, ayaw din siyang humarap dahil pag humarap siya sa media, kinakailangan itanong nila sa kanya tungkol sa mga katiwalian na ginagawa niya tsaka ng anak niya na humihingi ng pera sa China, sa Russia, sa Ukraine. No? So, in order not to have to ask the question, the CNN and everybody there, they don't want Biden to come out. And Biden does not come out. That's why sabi, he's only in his basement. No? Kasi takot humarap sa media at this point. No? All he does is say no, denial. No? Anyway, so ganito po itong, unless meron ka pa bang ibang ano?
No, I mean, that's it. ilang linggo na tayo nagsasalita about this thing. So,
Ang ating po kaibigan, si Mike Billington of the LaRouche movement, isa sa mga marami po siyang kaibigan dito sa Pilipinas at pumunta na siya dito ilang beses. And you might have heard us interview him on several occasions dito sa ating pong programa. No?
Our friend and ally.
He is our friend and ally. Yeah. No? Alam niya po itong mga programa ng Katipunan Demokratikong Pilipino. Yeah. At siya na po, pati siya, nagpapahayag sa ibang bansa no? Na mayroong grupo sa Pilipinas, Katipunan Demokratikong Pilipino, na nagtutulak ng ganitong mga programa no? At nakakaroon daw tayo ng mga prinsipyo at paninindigan na umaharap sa mga higante katulad ng mga oligarko no? At ito po ang sinasabi niya, bago pong mga events ito sa Pilipinas dahil noon wala daw mga grupong ganyan. Ayaw daw humarap nitong mga grupo sa mga oligarko. No? Ang gusto nilang harapin siyempre at mga linya nila ay yung sa politika, pagbabatikos sa mga namumuno. Katulad ngayon, makikita niyo yung mga binabatikos ang ating Pangulo ng mga oposisyon. No? Tapos itong katiwalian, itong corruption, yun ang issues. Corruption na pagnanakaw dito sa BIR at sa ano. No? At yung mga ibang kaliwa naman, ang padalas nilang sinasabi ngayon ay laban sila sa gobyerno dahil inahabol na sila ng Armed Forces of the Philippines. No? Wala na po tayong naririnig na laban sa mga oligarko. Yung mga kaliwa dati, ang kanilang sigaw, ang Pilipinas daw ay pag-aari ng imperialistang Amerika at ang mga presidente daw natin, katulad ni Presidente Marcos, ay tuta ng kano. Pagkatapos po ng sigaw ng ganyan, no, tanggal na si Marcos, wala nang tuta ng kano. Ang tuta ng kano, yung mga kaliwete na. Sila na mismo kasi nasasangkot din sila na tumatanggap sila ng mga pera sa CIA. Yan po ang kinonfirm ni General Parlade last week.
Right.
When we interviewed General Parlade, somebody from the viewers asked him about the National Endowment Fund, no? National Endowment for Democracy. And ito po ang organisasyon na pumupondo ng mga operations ng CIA. At ang sinasabi po niya, ang CIA daw po, nagpopondo din po dito sa mga kaliwa natin. Kanya sabi niya, kailangan itigil na yan, sabi ni General Parlade, dahil we have to stand up for our sovereignty. And no foreign government nor foreign agency should ever be allowed to interfere and to intervene in our domestic affairs because we are a sovereign country. Napakaganda po nung ating mga exchanges with General Parlade. Yeah. But tonight, we're going to have here to tell us kung andyan na ba. Pwede mo na siya siguro si Mike Billington ay sila po ang siyempre ang LaRouche organization has been very much involved in the development of organization and the politics. They have been given very strong opinions with regard to the politics going on in the United States, and using worldwide intelligence based on the network that the LaRouche organization has been able to put up around the world. Etong ang basic direction nila and still hopeful na magkakaroon ng summit ang mga bansang importante.
Four powers.
Four powers, no? Etong si President Putin ng Russia, Xi Jinping ng China, Trump ng US, at si Modi ng India. At pwede din sumama yung iba, pero itong apat na ito, importante nandyan. Ano po ang dapat nilang pag-usapan? Dalawa po, world peace, tsaka ayusin ang sistema ng pananalapi ng buong mundo.
World peace and world development.
Yeah, world development and yeah. And so this is the direction that they should be talking to. Pero dahil dito sa election, no, siguro kanya hindi makasagot si Trump na sumama dito sa summit na ito. Baka ang katakot niya siguro baka gamitin ng mga oposisyon ng Democratic Party ang pagmi-meeting doon na lalagyan ng ibang twist at lalagyan imbes na group would trying to come up with the solutions for the problems of the world. Baka gagamitin nila na ayan, kakampi na naman ni Trump sila Putin at ganyan. Baka gagawin. Kanya siguro, sa palagay ko lang po, siguro ayaw niya munang gawin ngayon hanggang makaupo siya for another 4 years. No? We don't doubt at all that Trump is a kind of president that is going to work for peace rather than work for war. No? Etong ginawa niya sa Middle East, ano yung mga ito, yung
Sudan, Bahrain,
mga peace treaty na ginawa niya.
Yeah, with Israel.
Between Israel, alam niyo po, Israel tsaka mga Arabo, hindi magkakasama yan. Pero ngayon, no, dahil may binobroker ni Trump, nagkaroon ng peace treaty ang Israel with Bahrain. Tapos nagkaroon ng peace treaty ang Israel with United Arab Emirates. Tapos nagkaroon siya ng peace treaty with Sudan. No? At siguro susunod na dito ang Saudi Arabia. No? Nasa linya na po yan. Isa-isa nilang ginagawa itong mga peace treaties na ito. Now that is not an action of a president who wants to expand into world war. No? As a matter of fact, as of now, 4 na po yata ang nominations niya for Nobel Peace Prize. Nominations pa lang po. No? 4 na nomination. Dahil po itong mga ginagawa niya. Pati yung sa North Korea, di ba?
North Korea.
North Korea at South Korea pinag-usap-usap niya. Tapos
yung Serbia and Kosovo.
Serbia and Kosovo, pinag-usap-usap niya rin. No? That is not the action of a president that wants a world war. No? Now, and that's why he's being continuously nominated for Nobel Peace Prize.
For what he had done already.
For what he had done. Taliwas po dun kay Barack Obama, kung natatandaan niyo po, si Barack Obama. Kakaupo pa lang niyang presidente siya.
Binigyan.
Wala pa siyang ginagawa, binigyan na siya ng Nobel Peace Prize. So anong ginawa ni Barack Obama? Gumawa ng gera. Okay. So without much ado, our friend from Leesburg, Virginia, Mr. Mike Billington, the good friend of many, many Filipinos.
Yes.
Good evening, Mike. There you are. Can you hear me?
I just now heard you, Butch. I wasn't hearing you before. Hi, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, well, we just had a few minutes to show some footages on the Trump rallies and some other things that have been going on in the United States.
Yeah.
But obviously, the reason we had invited you to join us this evening, since it's going to be only a few days from now, no, wherein we will find out whether the United States goes one way or the other. No, we needed your sound points as to how you expect these things to develop and play out. No? So, Mike Billington, go ahead.
May I ask first if how the hurricane, the typhoon, is hitting in Manila? Are you being hit by that huge typhoon?
We're expecting the typhoon. We have been expecting the typhoon to hit us in Metro Manila since this morning, and it's now almost 8 o'clock in the evening, and we had only felt very little effects of the typhoon. Some gusts of wind and some little rain, but other parts of the country are getting devastated. Yeah, specifically southern.
I watched some video. It's a horrendous storm.
Yes, southern Luzon in Bicol, no? And in Mindoro, in certain areas there are really devastated. I'm not sure why we are being spared in Metro Manila, because per predictions, Metro Manila would have been the right on target by the typhoon.
Right. That's why I asked. So, okay, I'm glad. My best wishes to your listeners who live in that area. It's not a nice situation to be hit with that kind of the power of nature. What we're being shown in the United States is not the power of nature, but the power of man in a very evil way. But it's having, potentially a far worse impact than the typhoon is having. No, there's no way to predict what's going to happen Tuesday. I mean, you can make a scenario that goes other way in terms of who's going to win. I believe that the amazing enthusiasm for Trump will characterize a victory on Tuesday. But the only thing we know for sure is that there's going to be chaos in the United States starting on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. That the apparatus that's been set up by the intelligence community and their British friends, who ran the attempted coup against President Trump over these past 4 years, the fake Russia hoax, the impeachment effort, and then the unleashing of a insurrection on the streets of the United States by organizations created and run by the FBI, such as the so-called Antifa, anti-fascist claim, which actually is a fascist movement, but claiming to be anti-fascist by simply declaring that anybody associated with President Trump is a fascist. And the so-called Black Lives Matter movement, which includes a lot of people who are rather foolishly following this carefully orchestrated intelligence community insurrection on the streets of the United States. That is set to explode on Tuesday. We know that they have set up cells around the country, that the people around Joe Biden, this pathetic, sad, early stage dementia character who's been put forward as the presidential candidate, Joe Biden, even though it is known absolutely with massive evidence and proof that this is a person who has spent his life serving the Wall Street banking interests. He's known as the senator from MBNA, which is now Bank of America, which runs the biggest credit card business in the country, in the world, out of the state of Delaware, protected by Joe Biden, who is a racist a vile racist who has worked closely with the most overtly racist Southern political leaders during the period that they were openly imposing apartheid on Black Americans. He passed a crime bill, he authored a crime bill in 1994, which effectively put tens of thousands of young Black men in prison under forced minimum sentences of 10 years or more for taking crack cocaine, which was a cheap form of cocaine, whereas the use of cocaine itself by the richer white and Black community was not put under this 10-year minimum sentence. In other words, it targeted poor Black and white, but mostly Black young men and women. So this character, who we now know, and I won't go through the details here unless you ask, that he was engaged in a global family crime operation, getting millions of dollars out of corrupt companies in Ukraine, in China, in Kazakhstan, and elsewhere, using his pathetic son, Hunter, who was thrown out of the military because of his drug addiction, who has very serious psychological problems himself, using this son to enrich his family, all of which was revealed totally by the fact that Hunter Biden's laptop was left at a store and ended up in the hands of the public and the FBI, showing clearly that Joe Biden was directly involved in his son's taking positions simply because of his name, taking millions and millions of dollars of money that was spent by corrupt institutions to gain favor with the then Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. So you have to wonder, how can the Democratic Party put up this sad, pathetic figure who obviously can't run anything, let alone the most powerful nation in the world, as a presidential candidate? Well, it's because they wanted somebody who would do exactly what he was told, even though he has trouble reading his teleprompter. But more importantly, they will clearly remove him from office very quickly. And the same people who gave us the wars in Iraq and Libya and in Syria, the same teams of people and intelligence community who worked for George Bush and Barack Obama, who turned my country, United States of America, into a colonial warlord power, waging genocidal wars on countries that were in no way enemies of our nation, who were not supporting terrorists, but in fact were the leading anti-terrorist forces. Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, and Assad, laying waste to these nations, killing millions, driving many, many millions out of their homes, desperately crossing the Mediterranean to try to get to Europe, or simply ending up living in neighboring countries. This genocidal, warmongering crowd is trying to retake the presidency from a president, Donald Trump, who campaigned and was elected president precisely because he said these wars were evil, they were the worst mistake America ever made, that he will end these, what he called endless wars, these regime change wars, right? Yeah. And why was there a Russiagate coup? Why was there impeachment? Because the British and their allies in the Trump and Obama intelligence community, in the media, in the press, in the Democratic Party, and in many, many Republican Party leaders who hate Trump, because they wanted to get back to war. They wanted to effectively relaunch the wars that Trump is trying to stop, and to prepare for far bigger wars against Russia and China. Why? Because the bankrupt financial system, the system based, Vera is calling me. Do you know why? Anyway, let's leave that. The bankrupt system centered in London and in Wall Street have, especially because of the collapse of the economy from this COVID thing, have pumped trillions and trillions of dollars and absolutely depend on wars through the military industrial complex to keep this bankrupt global financial system afloat. So we're facing a situation where Trump must be reelected. And let me appeal to your Philippine American friends who are watching from the United States and who will probably be planning to vote, that whether you like Trump or not, don't let that make your decision. Whether you like Joe Biden as a person or Donald Trump as a person, it doesn't matter. What matters is whether humanity is going to be thrust back into a war situation in which Trump's commitment to being friends with Russia and being friends with China is thrown out in favor of the Anglo-American colonial war policy that has been reestablished under the Bush and Obama administrations. This can and must be stopped, but we must encourage everybody to get out and vote for Trump. And then we have our work really begins, because Trump is still surrounded by this swamp. He's still, I can go through more details if you want to ask, but he still has in his cabinet people who don't follow his instructions. Right. When he says get out of Syria, his Defense Department says drop dead. We're not going to get out of Syria. We're not going to get out of Afghanistan. And we are going to prepare for war against Russia and China. So how to solve that problem is a serious question, one that our organization, the LaRouche organization, is in a critical position in the United States and worldwide to actually bring about a Trump administration based on the LaRouche policies of working with Russia and with China to bring about a new paradigm for mankind based on the idea that peace comes only through development. So let me stop there and we can discuss.
Okay, good. Hi, Mike.
Yeah, hi.
How are you?
Itos.
I just wanted to ask, from your last statement, that there are those in his cabinet who are obviously not playing according to his plan or the intention of the president. There are people that you mentioned before, and you can mention them again, of course. But how do you think this will play out, given that he has already established peace deals and normalized relations, at least on paper, with, say, Israel and Bahrain and some nations of the Middle East, and he's claiming that as soon as he gets to sit 4 more years, the very next week we would see Iran also on the table to negotiate another peace deal. How do you see this playing out in the context of obviously his Secretary of State might not be on the same page as the president?
There's a lot to be said about what's going on in the Middle East. I would just point out, though, that the only way he was able to make these initial steps towards breaking down the Israel versus Arab conflict, a British-created conflict from the very beginning, when they created the state of Israel in a way which set in motion a permanent crisis conflict between the Jews and the Palestinians, between the state of Israel and the Arab states, and so forth. that he has begun a new attack, a new track, which could, in fact, begin to break down this British-controlled permanent division in the Middle East. It's not perfect. It's only in its first stages. But the way in which he got this done was not done through the Secretary of State. It was done with his family. The only people Trump has been able to trust are his own family members. And it was Jared Kushner who orchestrated the peace deals that are taking place in the Middle East. He's had to keep the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense out of the personal diplomacy that Donald Trump has engaged in by working with both sides, working with the Israelis, working with the Saudis, working with other Arab states. He has not worked with Iran. He has taken this anti-Iran stance, which I think what you just mentioned, Itos, is in fact the case. That once we get him reelected, I suspect he will reach out both to China and to Russia, which are the most important, but also to North Korea, as he started to do before, which was sabotaged by this swamp around him, in this case, John Bolton, but also to Iran. And I suspect the Iranians will respond in a new administration. People ask, why do you give Trump so much slack? He chose people like Pompeo and Esper. He chose them. How can you not blame him? Well, Trump came in with no political machine. He tried to find people who agreed with him that we had to end this colonialist policy that the U.S. had adopted under both Bush and Obama. He reached out, for instance, to General Flynn, who had been the head of military intelligence until he was fired by Barack Obama for what Obama considered an unacceptable act of exposing the fact that Obama was arming Al-Qaeda and the terrorists. Not accidentally, as some claim, that he was arming so-called moderates, right? And that somehow those weapons ended up in the hands of the vile, beheading maniacs of Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra. No. Flynn revealed that this was the intentional policy of the Obama administration to use the terrorist networks, those who had carried out the attack on our nation on 9/11, 2001, to arm them, train them, and deploy them against Gaddafi in Libya and then against Assad in Syria. Both sovereign states, members of the United Nations, right? Not enemies of America, but to deploy them in order to further the British instigated chaos in the Middle East area, in order to keep the United States at odds with Russia and at odds with China. Now, Trump pulled off something brilliant in Syria, which is that he, with Putin, together with Putin, through personal diplomacy between President Trump and President Putin, right, not through the State Department or the Defense Department, arranged for Russia to send military forces into Syria to beat the terrorists in league with the United States, although officially they were not working together. So they made up a word. It was called deconfliction, right? So by American law, we were not allowed to work with the Russian military forces. So they set up deconfliction, where they were in daily contact, 24-hour contact, organizing their deployment against the terrorists in a way that would not conflict with each other. So they called it deconfliction. And Trump takes full credit for having destroyed ISIS in Syria, but he knows that the Russians actually did the bulk of the work. It was shared. It was a collaborative effort that only Trump, through his personal diplomacy with Putin, was able to accomplish. Now, it's my belief that if he gets reelected, he will immediately reach out to Xi Jinping, as he was before the unfortunate situation in which this pandemic, which has had a horrendous effect here in the United States, as it has in the Philippines and elsewhere, but particularly bad in the US. And unfortunately, Trump, who always asserted that despite the trade problem, which was a serious problem between the US and China, that despite that, Xi Jinping was a great leader of a great nation, as he repeated over and over. And when the COVID crisis hit, Trump correctly, for the first couple of months, said, the reason this is a crisis is because our cupboard was bare. Our health system has been destroyed by Obamacare, by even before Obama, under Bush. Hospitals, hundreds of hospitals were shut down across the United States, in our urban centers, in Washington, D.C., in New York City, and all over the rural areas, hundreds of hospitals shut down because they were not profitable to the private insurance companies on Wall Street who had taken over our health system, taken it over from a government overseen system, which you did not have 1/3 of the health bill going to prop up Wall Street companies as it is today. As a result, our nation was unprepared, just as Africa and South America, having been kept in a state of austerity and backwardness by the IMF, by the World Bank, were completely unprepared for dealing with the emergence of this virus because their health systems didn't exist. We're facing genocide in Africa. The head of the World Food Program has warned that already 7 million people this year have died of starvation, not from the virus exactly, but because the inability to combat the virus has destroyed the supply chain for food. At the same time that here in the United States, our food production capacity has been undermined and destroyed by the privatization of the food supply networks. So we're now facing a global genocide famine, unprecedented in modern history. The head of the World Food Program, who's a very close friend of President Trump, by the way, his name is Beasley, that he has warned that we could face 300,000 people every day dying of starvation in the very near term if we don't have an emergency mobilization, which would absolutely require the United States and China as the second biggest economy in the world and the fastest growing, most scientifically committed nation in the world to work together hand in hand through the Belt and Road, but focusing on health care. Now, these are the issues that Trump can focus on. And in terms of what happens to Pompeo, this lunatic who spends every waking hour declaring China to be the greatest threat to mankind in all of history, that they're eating the babies of the Muslims in Xinjiang, that they're sterilizing the women, that they're oppressing their people, that they're aggressive, that they're trying to take over the world, and so on and so forth. Trump never says those things. He says, I'm disappointed that China didn't stop the virus. I'm reconsidering my view of China. So he needed an excuse, really, something to blame for the impact of the virus and the breakdown of our economy, which was caused partially by this virus. And he unfortunately accepted the idea that he could blame China. But I'm convinced that as soon as he gets through this election, then he can immediately reach out to Xi Jinping and to Vladimir Putin, exactly as Helga Zepp LaRouche has called for. Mr. LaRouche, 12 years ago, said the only way to deal with the descent of the world into this new dark age, which we're seeing today, is for the four great cultures of Eurasia, China, Russia, India, and the United States representing what should be the best of European culture. These cultures must combine their power, their commitment, their moral sense of the future of mankind together, and to end the reign of terror of the British Empire. of the financial cartels who have imposed austerity and deindustrialization under this Green New Deal insanity on the world. That this is the necessary step, and the only way that's going to happen is for Trump to free himself from this crowd around him, from the media, which he has never compromised with, from the the Democrat Party has gone completely mad, but also those within his own party. He's not really a Republican in that sense.
Yeah.
He fought like hell against the Bush crowd, against the people like Cruz and Rubio when he campaigned for the presidency. And he won the Republican nomination because he had reached out to the American people. And he addresses the American people, not through the institutions, not through the media, not through the Congress, but through his personal relationship, through these huge rallies and through Twitter. And as I'm sure you know, we are experiencing the greatest censorship policy in the history of our nation taking place right now by these social media accounts who are literally shutting down anybody who tries to tell the truth. That's the level of the breakdown of America going on today.
Yeah. Well, Mike, as you were saying something about Trump not really a Republican, he actually said that in one of his rallies. I heard him say directly, he says, "I'm not really a Republican," he says. But which meant that that he was actually a private person who decided to run because he felt that his country needed for somebody like him to run. Now, going to obviously, this whole thing is that we want to happen is depends on the victory of President Trump for another 4 years at least. Now what we have been seeing in the YouTube, because the mainstream media do not show this at all, is a massive attendance and participation of the American people in practically all of his rallies, except the one in Minnesota, where the governor prevented the people from going to attend to him and actually prevented him from being able to go near the people. So he had only 250 near him, but thousands were outside, were not allowed to go in. That's only one case, but the rest, as the television stations were showing and showed it in YouTube, these are, I suppose, the fringe type of networks, but nevertheless very effective. Massive. And then, in contrast, when you see Biden, if you see Biden, because he's so scared to get out because somebody might ask him about his son and what he used to do. But if you see him, and he's supposed to be addressing, even when Obama was helping out, what they did was, instead of people, they put cars. They called it a parking lot rally.
So maybe a dozen cars at most.
Yeah, honking their horns as loud as they can. Yeah.
To make a lot of noise.
This is very important, Bush. Even the U.S. correspondent for the Telegraph, which is the leading spokesman for the British Empire in the U.K., their U.S. correspondent wrote back and published an article saying, "Look, don't sit back thinking that because the polls and the media say that the American people hate Trump and they're going to elect Biden. Don't believe it. I'm here. There is no enthusiasm for Biden. People know that he's a weak character. He didn't go in describing that he was criminal and demented. But he said the enthusiasm for Trump is unbelievable."
Right.
And it is. As you're saying, these rallies, huge rallies.
Much more.
He's being very public about what you just said, that he's not. Let me read you a short thing that was released by the White House 2 days ago. I think it's very important for people to hear this. This is a tweet, a statement from the U.S. government officially, from the White House, from the Trump administration. Quote, "For too long, the political class, including party leaders," he's not saying Democrat leaders, party leaders, both parties.
Yeah.
These party leaders, lobbyists, think tanks, the media, and more have ignored the concerns of millions of American families. The American people wanted change. The establishment didn't listen. The establishment, as you said, and like he says in the rallies, I'm not a politician. I'm not an insider in Washington. I'm an outsider trying to clean out the swamp, which really we know to be this British creation of a British system taking over our economy, taking over our policies in order to destroy the American system, which did not allow free market, free trade policies to effectively loot the economy rather than building the economy. So it says the establishment didn't listen, President Trump did. And that's really the case.
Right.
Is that he has now gone public in this campaign.
Yeah.
And I believe that he's doing this so concertedly now because once he's elected, and there have already been leaks, rumors, you can't trust them completely, but they're probably leaks from the few people around Trump who understand what he's trying to do, that as soon as he's elected, he's going to fire Christopher Wray, the corrupt head of the FBI, who's running this anti-China McCarthyite witch hunt in the United States, and who's refusing to turn over FBI documents that Trump wants to declassify to prove that the intelligence agents who were part of the coup, the Russia coup, are themselves the criminals. They say he's going to fire Gina Haspel, the head of the CIA, who people don't know much about Gina Haspel, but she was the CIA desk chief in London between 2014 and 2017 when they run the Nazi coup in Ukraine. And then she oversaw the 2015, 16, 17 process of setting up the Russia coup against Trump. The Christopher Steele dossier, the setup of Papadopoulos and these other people by intelligence operatives in London. All of this was done under Gina Haspel's control. So the current head of the CIA was part of the coup against the President of the United States, committing treason.
Yeah,
and they say they're going to fire Esper. And I believe they're also that he will fire Pompeo quickly as soon as he gets elected.
Mike, I just want to go back to what I was driving at earlier.
What?
It's obvious that to many people and to the American people that Trump is the support for the people, support for Trump is overwhelming. Now, the mainstream media, which is part of the, well, you call it the swamp, the deep state, or whatever it is doing whatever they can to deny the truth to the people. Now, it of course makes us very uncomfortable, at least for many citizens of the United States, uncomfortable that despite the kind of overwhelming support that Trump is expected to have, there will be an opportunity, or they will create an opportunity to try to steal the elections from Trump. Now, I am sure all the venues of cheating are being now addressed by the groups of Trump. But whatever it is, even if he does get elected, there might be all kinds of things that they will be throwing into even the kitchen sink to try to stop him from sitting as president. So what will this be? Have you, do you have any idea of how this cheating can be used, or the mechanisms that they will use, including the legal things and so on, so forth, that they will use to prevent the president from sitting. The reason we will be interested in this, I am sure our listeners would be interested in specifically what, because the Philippines always has a history of cheating in the elections, and we
Yes,
claim to be experts on the matter.
You know something about vote fraud in the Philippines, I know.
Yeah. So
You have a vice president who doesn't belong there, as I understand it.
yeah. So what is it? Can you give us an idea as to what type of post-election problems Trump will be facing?
Yeah, well, like I said, they have in place the ability to use this street insurrection to go berserk starting on Tuesday, claiming that Trump is claiming a victory when he really didn't win, supposedly. They've already arranged in 4 major states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, I think those, and Wisconsin, I think, or Minnesota. But anyway, 4 major potential swing states have already passed laws, and the elections are run state by state in this country. They're not uniform national laws on how to run an election. So 4 of these swing states have passed laws to allow mail-in votes to be counted even if they arrive in some states 3 days and in other states 6 days after the election. These are swing states, including Pennsylvania and Ohio, which means that on election day, right, nobody's going to know who won if they're close in those states. If there's an overwhelming victory by one or the other, then perhaps we'll know. But that's not likely. And we now know that there have been 90 million mail-in ballots sent out by the election boards in all these states, 90 million. About 40 million have been returned. That means there's about 50 million or perhaps more of these ballots floating around the system. We've seen cases where piles of ballots were left in the lobby of apartment buildings. We know that there are people who are illegally going around house to house, gathering up the ballots that arrived in people's homes. In many states, they sent the ballot to every registered voter, whether they asked for it or not, claiming that because of COVID, we had to make everybody have the right to vote from home. But there are many, many dead people on the voter registration lists. They don't just disappear when somebody dies. Many people moved. All of those ballots were sent out. In any case, there's at least 50 million ballots floating around, ready to be used for vote fraud. But just the fact that the votes aren't going to be counted on election day means that the preparation for chaos, which is both the street rallies, the anarchists going out and looting, and this began already in Philadelphia and New York over this last week, by the way. But, that side, plus the Democratic Party crowd run by a few people who have been famous for running color revolutions in other countries, have hired a team of 300 lawyers for the Democratic Party, ready to file all kinds of lawsuits state by state, creating instability, uncertainty, in which there can be an attempt to carry out what might even be an attempt to have a military coup. Now, I know you've been showing and talking about what Colonel Black, Senator Black from the state of Virginia, former head of Army law, the JAG at the Pentagon, who has warned that there is a team of military generals, those who ran these illegal wars under Bush and Obama, who have openly attacked the president, which they know they're not supposed to do as retired military, who have not condemned the call that was put out in the Atlantic magazine, which is a magazine run by the neoconservative crowd, a call by two retired military colonels for the military to move in and take Donald Trump out of the White House if he doesn't leave, right?
Does that
So what's
mean,
going to happen is the claim that the Democrats have won, then an effort to make a military coup or total anarchy in the streets of the United States. Therefore, we must have an overwhelming victory for Donald Trump in the election. It's extremely important that people not vote just because they like or don't like the personality of Biden or Trump, but they vote to save this nation from a color revolution, a coup, which has been ongoing for 4 years, but which could explode in a period in which the military-industrial complex is preparing for nuclear war against Russia and China. This is how serious this is.
Mike, based on what you just said about what Senator Black has also shared with us, is it our assumption that President Trump does not have the military backing that he should have?
It's absolutely the problem. Remember, like I said before, when he came in, he didn't have people who supported his ideas. He tried to get Flynn. You see what they did to him, right? Yeah. He got driven out by the coup plotters around Robert Miller, the same people that put Mr. LaRouche and myself in prison back in the 1980s. Same people who got rid of Flynn. Our friend Roger Stone, who has been a close personal friend of President Trump for the last 40 years, who actually got him to run for president, but who also, Roger Stone, believes that Lyndon LaRouche is the greatest mind of the 20th century. He has obviously been passing on the ideas of our organization and of Lynn to the president. So what happened to him? He didn't even get appointed to the cabinet, but they put him on trial and gave him a fake trial as well. So anybody who was close to Trump was driven out. So he had to pick secondary people. So he chose some of these military generals who, were considered respected by the establishment. People like Kelly, McMaster, Mattis, and one after another he had to fire. Yeah. Because they wouldn't do what he said. He said, get out of Syria, and they said, drop dead. Get out of Afghanistan. No, we want to be friends with Russia. Forget it. Russia's our enemy. We want to be friends with China. Forget it. We have to send our massive nuclear armed submarines in a ring around China. We have to provoke a military conflict in the South China Sea by deploying our massive air and sea capacity right along China's border, right? In a way which is so provocative. We have to massively arm Taiwan in a way which is an open provocation against China. We want a military confrontation. That's what these people are telling Trump. Now, until this year, with the run into the election, he was simply firing these guys like Steve Bannon, like John Bolton, who sabotaged our effort to make peace with North Korea, and Steve Bannon, who argued that China and Russia were our enemies when Trump was trying to be friends. So he had to fire them. He stopped firing people because of the election, because he wanted to have some sort of stability. I think it was a mistake. I think he should have fired Pompeo and Esper a long time ago. But he didn't, because he thought he had to keep some stability to get himself elected. Hopefully then he will be freed from this controlled environment and coup attempt, and he can get rid of this crowd. But the vote fraud threat is extremely real. That's why the media ridicules him and says, oh, he's trying to stop people from voting. Quite the opposite. He's trying to stop massive vote fraud. And even if the vote comes in his favor, the setup of a structure which can bring down the government through chaos, through massive legal offensives and so forth, and basically steal the election. That's clearly the intent.
Mike? Yeah, I have a question on the economics. Recently, the numbers show that there was a 33% recovery in the economy, and then Trump, of course, is trumpeting these claims. He's also said that he's brought back manufacturing to the U.S. And is trying to revive the different industries which made the United States the power that it is. My question is it enough to fuel? Of course, he also revived NASA, the NASA program, and is touting the trade deal with China, which sort of compels China to buy $250 billion worth of agricultural products. So, what's your take on this, Mike?
Well, the NASA program is phenomenal. I mean, when he came in, NASA had been practically put in mothballs. Obama virtually shut down the space program. And Trump has not only revived NASA, but he's worked with Elon Musk and SpaceX, the private sector, collaborating very closely with NASA on this phenomenal idea to inspire our nation and the world the way Kennedy did in the 1960s with the, we're going to land on the moon in this decade. He said, we're going to go back to the moon, the first woman on the moon and another astronaut, and we are going to have a permanent station on the moon in preparation to go to Mars. And we're going to do that by 2024. This is a tremendous example of what a sane president who believes in America and believes in humanity can do. The trade deal, let me come back to China, but let me mention first, just as Trump, I think, has made a mistake by trying to say China is responsible for the coronavirus.
Yeah.
And let me repeat, he does not say the crazy things that Pompeo does about China. He doesn't say that, that they're aggressors, they're human rights violators. He never says that. He just says, I'm disappointed that they let the virus out of China. And that's another whole story. But he also makes a mistake in looking at the stock market and saying essentially we're prosperous again because the stock market's going up. And the 33% figure you gave, this is a subterfuge. We have not returned to the level of production that we had before the shutdown and the lockdown. There was an increase. And if you take an increase over a quarter and stretch it out to the full year, it comes to 33% if we kept growing at that rate. But that's not what's happening. We're basically just making up for what was shut down. So a lot of this stuff is not clear. But on China, and I think Trump, no question, Trump began to revive the industrialization of America. He's committed to nuclear power. He's supporting fusion power. He's doing everything to get to there. He's held back because, not only because of the opposition to him, but because we are sitting on top of a financial bubble, which is unprecedented in human history, and it's been made much worse by the pumping of trillions of dollars into to make up for the shutdown, the lockdown. Only a small portion of that is going to the business and to individuals. Most of it's being done to prop up the banks, and it's just making for a bigger bubble, which could explode at any moment. So on the financial side, it's a grave danger. But let me say that on the China thing, while Trump doesn't repeat the garbage coming from Pompeo, he also continues to praise China for living up to the trade deal, and they have. Even the Commerce Department put out a report just now saying that they have bought everything they said they would buy, and they've changed 51 out of 57 internal rules that facilitate easier investment into China. So they've lived up to it. Plus, something happened this week that hasn't been in the news, but is important. Trump told the Defense Secretary Esper and the top military leaders to hold a meeting, a virtual meeting with the Chinese military leaders on, I believe it was Wednesday or Tuesday. And both sides acknowledged after that meeting that we have arranged to make sure there was no so-called October surprise. You know, somebody provoking a military incident with the idea that this is going to affect the election. Right. Even Esper told the Chinese, no such thing is going to happen, and we have to maintain close contact to make sure there's no accidental spark that could start a war. Now, this is not Esper's policy. This is President Trump's policy. He was able to force that issue through the military. Despite his open fight with the military-industrial complex, he somehow was able to force this act this week, which is a promising step forward. And I think it further encourages us to believe that Trump is going to do what we've been encouraging him to do, which is to meet openly with Putin and with Xi Jinping. Should have done it before the election. I think that would have guaranteed his victory in the election. But in any case, now that we're upon the election, hold that meeting immediately. Get together on both the finishing off the terrorist problem, working together on development. If we're going to have peace in the Middle East, as you brought up, Itos, if that plan is going to work, it's only going to be because Trump does what Lyndon LaRouche was doing with the Oasis plan. You bring development into the area. You begin to develop this undeveloped area that's been kept backwards by the British and the financial apparatus around the IMF and the World Bank. And to do that, you're going to have to work with China. It's the Belt and Road from China, which is bringing development into every area. And like President Trump, the Chinese have worked with all sides. They work with Israel, they work with Saudi Arabia, they work with the Palestinians, they work with Iran. You know, bring this idea of development, peace through development. Then you have a basis to end the British imperial divisions, which have been used to keep these areas on a tinderbox ready to blow up. So that's where we can and must go.
I wanted to follow up on this, Mike. What do your sources, or from your perspective, is there still is Xi Jinping, President Xi Jinping from China, is he still as his hold on the Communist Party leadership is still strong? Because we've heard from different sources and different articles that there is a move to unseat even Xi. So what is that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's part of the British control over the global media. That they're trying to somehow say that the Chinese people are ready to throw Xi Jinping out. Total nonsense. Xi Jinping is loved by the Chinese people. He's lifted 800 million people out of poverty. Not he alone, but you know, over these last 40 years, and especially during his era, has virtually eliminated, and he's committed to literally eliminating a 0% extreme poverty by the end of this year. It's only a couple months away. He just held a major conference, which he himself chaired, basically saying, we are going to reach this goal of eliminating poverty, even in the most poor, backward areas, by the end of this year. We've committed to do it, and we're going to do it despite the coronavirus and the problems this has caused. He has created a commitment to education that is now generating, I don't know the exact number, but I believe more scientists and engineers in China than the rest of the world combined. He has created more classical musicians trained in both Chinese classical music, but emphatically in the great classical culture of Europe, of Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, and so forth. In China, then most of the world, maybe not the rest of the world combined, but you know, almost every young child in China is taught to play classical music.
Yeah.
This is a cultural revolution
Yeah.
based on the Confucian tradition, which was almost snuffed out during the Cultural Revolution, this disaster, this dark age in China, under the Gang of Four in the last years of Mao Zedong. And he, out of the ashes of that disaster, has unleashed a renaissance. Remember, the European Renaissance of the 15th century came after the greatest dark age in Western history. The plague swept through Europe, wiping out 1/3 to 1/2 of the population in the early 1300s. The Europe was tied up in 100 years war, constant warfare, perpetual warfare, like today, like under Bush and Obama, perpetual warfare, which Trump says he has to stop. But that's what happened to Europe. And out of that, you had the emergence of people who said, wait, we can't just stop the chaos. We have to be human. We have to come up with ideas that actually address the creative power of the humanity, not geopolitical battles between factions of oligarchs, right? And out of that, you had Nicholas of Cusa and Leonardo da Vinci. You had the emergence of a true Renaissance, which unleashed the creative powers of the population, which was committed to educating all the people, right? This was this great Renaissance, which then spread around the world. The Jesuits, in fact, took it to China and were collaborating with China, which was coming out of its own crisis. So now you see this Renaissance taking place in China. It's a true Renaissance. It's based on the highest levels of culture. The population is fully mobilized, participating in this incredible infrastructure development. You know, you've seen 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. People now can move around the country. Ports, bridges, phenomenal infrastructure development, energy, power, nuclear power. And with the Belt and Road, they said, okay, it's time for us to take this process, this idea that you build infrastructure, which is the bottleneck to get a poor country out of poverty and into industrialization. We've proven it within China, and we're going to take it to the rest of the world. And the neocons and the British say, oh, they're going to take over the world. Well, the fact is, the imperial powers in the West made sure that we never built any infrastructure in the third world, right? We built labor, we built factories using the cheap labor, we took out the minerals from their mines, but we refused to build infrastructure. We said, oh, we're going to leave that to the private sector, which meant, of course, no infrastructure. And the Chinese said, no, our government policy is going to be to direct credit into infrastructure in every country without concern for how they choose to run, what kind of political system they choose to have in their country, without concern for that. We're going to build the infrastructure, and that way we're going to have a win-win situation. Well, you know, that used to be called the American system.
Yeah.
That's what Roosevelt wanted to do after World War II.
Yeah.
That's what maybe Trump wants to do.
Without mentioning too much.
That's what Trump wants to do. I'd like to, there is a question coming from our audience, Mike, so I'll read them up to you for you to address. It comes from, one is from Harry Tambuatco. He's a friend. Please explain why President Trump denies science or the COVID CNN posts. President Trump denies COVID as a threat and even refuses the wearing of masks and distancing.
That what you're saying comes from the fake news press. It's simply not true.
It's coming from
not only
CNN.
does Trump not deny science, but Trump responded, as I mentioned earlier, when the virus hit, he correctly identified the fact that U.S. was unprepared to deal with this kind of virus, You may know that Lyndon LaRouche, way back in 1974, after the breakdown of the Bretton Woods system under Nixon, LaRouche forecast that we would have pandemics, right? That pandemics would emerge, not because a new virus would emerge. Viruses emerge all the time. That's not what caused the pandemic. The coronavirus is not the cause of the pandemic. The pandemic was caused by the fact that our health systems in the US and around the world had been taken down. And therefore, we didn't have what should have been the defense that could have stopped it cold, the way it was in China. It was stopped by isolating it in Wuhan and stopping it, right? We didn't have the capacity to do that, and it's worse. And then this story, this line that Trump doesn't follow science, they say that about climate change. They say Trump won't follow the science of climate change.
Yes.
Well, the whole climate change story is anti-science nonsense, lies, right? Lies based on computer models set up in order to scare people by the British and their allies in the US, and these pathetic children who are sent out to say, oh, we have to save the world. You have to stop industry, shut down the economy. We must have, we must stop climate change. That's the existential crisis facing mankind. Total lies, nonsense, hysteria. The sky is falling, Chicken Little. That's what this is. And Trump says, no, I'm following the science. The science says that the carbon has nothing to do with the climate. Nothing. Virtually nothing. Less than 0.1% of so-called greenhouse gases are carbon. It's mostly water. And it has to do with cosmic radiation and the cloud formation. You know the story. Right? So he follows the science. On COVID, he follows the science. He didn't say don't wear masks. Some of the so-called scientists at first said don't wear masks, and now they're saying wear masks. And Trump says wear masks. But we're not going to continue shutting down the economy. We're going to get the vaccine on. He mobilized what he called warp speed in order to have a miracle, a real scientific miracle, which is that viruses, and collaborating internationally, by the way, even with the Chinese, not publicly, but private people involved in developing these vaccines are working with the Russians and the Chinese quietly. But he is absolutely committed to getting these vaccines online as rapidly as possible. Normally, this takes 3 to 4 years, and they've done it in less than a year. This is a scientific miracle. That's science. Science is going to space. I'll just mention yesterday, Harley Schlanger, I think you all know Harley Schlanger, and myself and Jason Ross, the three of us, did a forum. I'll send you the link to that forum, which I think is very important. One of the things Dennis Speed, who's the narrator, pointed out, he said, if on Tuesday Trump is defeated and what he's done with NASA is shut down, as it will be, right? It'll be shut down if Biden comes in. Then we've just learned that in 2068, there's a huge asteroid that's likely to hit the Earth. If we don't go to Moon and Mars, if the Artemis program is shut down or slowed down, then we may not have the capacity to go out and meet that asteroid and divert it, the so-called strategic defense of Earth that the Russians promoted and America adopted. If we don't have that, it could hit the United States or it could hit China and the Philippines, and we could wipe out some or all of the human race because we don't support Trump on Tuesday. Now that's thinking like Lyndon LaRouche, telling people the truth about how we as mankind create the future. And we have to think today, as you've often pointed out, Butch, we have to think in terms of how the future determines the present, not the other way around.
That's right.
But that we as human beings have to have that perspective of 50, 100 years, 1,000 years. And what we do today will affect how the human race survives or doesn't survive.
Right.
And that's a very crucial situation where one of these rare cases where what happens on one day could affect the future of mankind for generations and generations to come.
That's true.
Okay, there's another question. Okay, this also comes from a friend, Eric Bautista. He says, "Good evening, Butch and Ethos. God bless. Dr. Shiva, who is running for senator under Trump's Republican Party, is he a supporter of Trump? Do you think if Trump wins the election, the New World Order will collapse? If God is with Trump, who can be against Trump?" Those are his comments, but I'd like you to comment on what he says.
I don't really know who Dr. Shiva is. I don't know. Can the new world order, so-called New World Order, that's a phrase that's used by many people to describe how the British Empire was establishing what Fukuyama called the end of history. You know, liberal democracy rules the world, which is a polite phrase for British and American banking rules the world and commits genocide and the depopulation so loved by Bertrand Russell and Prince Philip and Prince Charles. Yes, I think you're right. I think it's exactly that Trump has taken on. He tends to describe it as, well, no, he describes it both as domestic and international. Right. He attacks what they call the globalizers, right? He openly says the globalizers. Well, who does he mean by the globalizers? Right. It's those people who say we must give up sovereignty over our nations. Human beings should not have a role in the governance of their nations. We should take that away. We should establish a world government run by bureaucrats, not elected by the people, but appointed by the wise people at the City of London and Wall Street, you know.
The oracles.
Yeah, the oligarchy.
Yeah.
So this is what is sometimes called the New World Order. Yes, that's what Trump is committed to destroy. Trump is not a universal genius like Lyndon LaRouche.
Yeah.
He doesn't have this incredible grasp of history, of culture, of science, of statecraft. But he has powerful instincts that you cannot be swayed by popular opinion, because popular opinion is created. It's not, here's what I think, you know, I believe that I like the Republican Party over the Democrat Party. Yeah. I like the Democrat Party over, that's not what people think. They're told that this is their role in life, is to accept that you've been given two options, take a pick. That's your role as a human being in governing the world. You know, what do you like better? As LaRouche once said when we had the election of Bush versus Gore, he said, you're basically told, which do you prefer, AIDS or cancer? Which do you like better?
Yeah,
you know,
that's right. That's
which would you rather have?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the mentality of so-called popular opinion. And Trump has this strong instinct that this is evil. So he's been able to identify the globalization process where people, well, of course it's good to have globalization. But he said, no, we need sovereignty. That doesn't mean America über alles. Doesn't mean we're going to defeat the rest of the world. As he said at the United Nations, when I say America first, I mean my responsibility is to the American people first.
Right.
Xi Jinping's responsibility is China first. His responsibility is to the Chinese people first, because sovereignty is the only basis on which the individual has the potential for actually affecting the future of humanity through their role in a sovereign nation state. Right? Then you have the question of collaboration between sovereign nation states, which is what's essential. Trump has an inkling of that. You know, he wants to be friends with Russia and China. Why those two in particular? Because they're two great cultures in the world, and India, and the Arab world and the African world. You know, there have been Arab renaissances, there have been African renaissances, but in the case of the Arab culture and the African cultures, they have been oppressed, kept backwards through wars, through crusades, right? The crusades, which were meant to, the British creation of these different, the Sykes-Picot Treaty dividing the country, Africa being subjected to slavery, and so forth. So those cultures have great moments, but they've been suppressed. They've been kept backwards. They're weak. When we get these great cultures of China, of Russia, of India, of the United States being the European culture, get them together around these ideas, around the ideas of progress and peace, then the Arab cultures and the African cultures also can rise out from under the boot of empire and contribute what they've contributed in the past, like in the Arab Renaissance and the Baghdad Caliphate, and even less open from Africa, but nonetheless great moments in African history in pockets, which can begin to bring the continent together, as in Latin America, where they've been kept divided, where they've been prevented from having a collaborative effort. As you know, Mr. LaRouche launched a campaign throughout Ibero-America calling for the integration of Ibero-America around a common aim, a common culture, which already exists in potential, but which has been kept divided by imperial policies. So this is the moment at which we can and we must bring these great cultures together for a renaissance, which is not just a renaissance of one nation or one culture, but a human renaissance, which can truly get the world out of its childhood, the human race out of its childhood, throwing mud at each other and having wars, and get on with the business of colonizing space together.
My next question was partly answered by your just statement now, Mike. But I just wanted to say that here, Ethos and I have been discussing the developments in the United States solely as the only subject that we take up for 2 hours every Sunday for the last 2.5 months. The reason for this is we always tell our listeners that whatever happens in the United States now, in its most critical situation, will impact on our country and the rest of the world. And exactly how this is going to play out, we're not too sure. We simplify it in the sense that if one faction wins, we can expect a third world war soon. If another faction wins, we would at least have probably 4 more years of peace. And when we explain this, of course, we also refer to the importance of collaboration of the superpowers. That we are not helpless, even as a small country, to stand up and voice and let the world hear our calls for world peace. And in so doing, inevitably, because of the positions of 2 political candidates right now, inevitably you do have to support Trump. Now, if in case worse comes to come, I mean, if Biden, by some reason, whatever mechanisms they are able to use, takes on the position as president of the United States, what are we to do in the immediate future? What are the steps that we should be taking as both as Filipinos here and probably LaRouche organization, and what steps should be taken in order. Obviously, we will be in conflict with what Biden will be pushing. So, how do you think this is going to come out in the immediate future?
I would say, and I said this yesterday in this event, which I'll send you a link to. I think that whether we have the disaster of the British war party getting elected, or even if Trump gets elected, we have to do one thing between that election and the inauguration in January, and that is we must get the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche. As you know, Helga and all of us have said over and over again that the incarceration of LaRouche by Robert Miller, by this hit squad that they deployed against Trump recently, but which put LaRouche in prison back in 1989. That's the purpose of that, and its partial impact was to deny the American people and citizens throughout the world access to these powerful, uplifting, and optimistic ideas that LaRouche, as a unique figure in history, a true universal genius, had put forward both to warn of the disaster ahead if these ideas were not implemented, but also to inspire people to how we can have a world of sovereign nation states working together to the benefit of mankind as a whole. People were denied those ideas. They were forced into what we were talking about before, where all they could do is choose between two bad alternatives being presented to them by the oligarch. But even if Trump gets elected, he's got to fire Pompeo and Christopher Wray and almost everybody. The Wall Street team that he's depended on for his economic policies, even though he himself was committed to implementing Glass-Steagall and an American financial system. So, but who's he going to hire? Who's he going to find who will follow his intention? I would say that only if he has the courage to exonerate Lyndon LaRouche, whether he wins or loses the election, he's still president until January. Mm-hmm. Only if he exonerates Lyndon LaRouche will that, on the one hand, make those ideas available to the human race. But on the other, there are many, many people in positions of power and influence who know LaRouche, who believe in what his ideas were, what he said about the warnings as well as the solutions, but didn't have the courage to publicly identify with Lyndon LaRouche or to take on the British Empire. If Lynn is exonerated, I believe there will be people like that in the institutions who will come forward and will be precisely those individuals who have experience in economics and military and social policies and in science and space, who will be able to fill those positions in a Trump cabinet. But I'm not sure he's going to find the people he needs, and might be put through the same ringer where he fires one of these people and has to hire another one who's going to do the same thing.
Right.
So I think everybody, all of your listeners, your supporters in the Philippines and in America and around the world, I think it's every human being's responsibility who has some sense of this incredible role of Lyndon LaRouche as an individual, as a genius, to do what's necessary to get to your congressman, if you're an American, or encourage Duterte to publicly endorse LaRouche as ideas, call on the president to exonerate LaRouche. Anything you can do to force this issue. Trump is capable of doing that. Remember, he exonerated a number of people, not just Flynn and Roger Stone, but even the former mayor of Chicago, a Democrat, right, who he knew was who was railroaded illegally into a prison sentence. Blagojevich is his name, I believe. But he exonerated him. Why? Because he knows the Justice Department has been illegally and criminally targeting people who were a threat to the British imperial system, and nobody more than Lyndon LaRouche. So Trump knows that. He knows it from Roger Stone. He knows it from other connections. He knows what's going on here. He will do it if there is an outpouring of support for the exoneration of LaRouche, and I think that will change history in a very, very dramatic way.
Thank you very much. Our time is up, Mike, but we'd like to give you still the last word, especially in these most critical times, where in a few days we may see the outcome of a historic election, which will direct humanity in one direction or the other.
Right. I'll just reiterate what I said. There's a lot of people are really, really upset by the brusque, aggressive personality of Donald Trump. Regardless of what you think about the way he approaches what he's doing, think about the impact of the policies that he's already implemented, which will be taken down, and the danger of war if the war party comes back to power. And Biden is simply a front man for the war party. Trump is the first president since Ronald Reagan who has not started a war. And he, I'm certain, will not. So I encourage you to contact all of your friends in the United States, if they're citizens and they're able to vote, to do everything you can to rally people, whatever their personal views of the personality per se, right? Get this man elected in order to create the potential that we can return to a scientific human future rather than the Green New Deal, self-destruction, shutting down the economy, going to war, and so forth. That's the choice. So I urgently call on you to do that. And those of you who know about Lyndon LaRouche, who have a sense of who this organization is, I encourage you to do what you can to call for his exoneration now, between the time of November and January, even if Trump is defeated, for him to exonerate Lynn and create the potential where we can deal with the disaster that will unfold if the United States descends into being a fascist country.
Okay.
Mike, I just wanted to say, I don't think that U.S. citizens will allow that, ever.
I think you're right.
and we'll be fighting alongside patriots,
true.
Right? Yeah.
Pardon?
We'll be fighting alongside you, like always,
Yes,
patriots.
Let me say to your viewers that the American organization, the LaRouche organization, and our hundreds of thousands of followers are very, very much aware of what Butch, you, and Itos, and Bear, and Kathy, and others are doing in the Philippines, not only to affect the Philippines, but to affect the rest of the world. So we appreciate that. We know that this is the kind of fight that must be fought in every nation. And I think you have made the Philippines a leading force in this global fight for humanity.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Mike. You're, of course, you know that you've been a frequent visitor to the Philippines and that helped us explain Lyndon LaRouche to the rest of the Filipinos here. As you say, he's a universal genius, and that means he is not owned by the United States.
No more.
He's owned by humanity, right?
Right.
And we recognize that. Thank you very much, and we hope to be able to get to talk to you soon after the elections as well.
Yeah, we probably should do another show so we can discuss what's going to happen next week. Is going to be an incredible week in history.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Bye-bye, Mike.
Okay, thanks
Thank
very
you very
much.
much.
So long.
Well,
Nag-off na ba siya?
yeah. Detaching. 9 o'clock. But I just
Okay.
wanted to say, pahabol.
Oo, yung...
You want to read? Sige.
Yeah, ano yan? Ano itong pahabol?
Hindi, we just got showing the crowd yung huling rally ni Trump sa Pennsylvania. 57,000 daw ang nag-attend ang rally niya.
57.
57 daw.
John Peter, greeting us with peace sign kamaho. Lemmy Rojas, hi Mike, watching you guys, mabuhay. Tayang Lemmy, pero sabihin natin na nanonood ka at tutulong ka, kasama kasi namin, di ba? 6 million Jews killed by Hitler, but Joe Biden said Hitler is okay. Fuck you, Joe Biden.
F you, Joe Biden.
Okay. Matagal na po ninyo akong tagapakinig. Ibinoto po ko kayo, Sir Butch, at ilang kapatido nyo nitong midterm election. Sana po mapaandar ng BNPP para kapakanan ng Pilipino sa pamamagitan nyo. We will try. Tuloy pa rin ng ating laban dito at pinapasukan po natin lahat ng mapapasukan para maihatid po natin sa ating Pangulo ang importansya ng BNPP. Alan Flores Arroyo, Sir Butch, what is KDP take on Eric expose about CPP-NPA? Alam nyo, we have not all listened to it except that he is supposed to be a former NPA, and he has credibility and knowledge on their operations and what they had done and the kind of atrocities they have committed. So maybe in the future, pag nakausap po natin, we will try to get Eric Celis, that is his name, Eric Celis into our program. Sir Butch, what is KDP take on Eric's expose? Okay. Good evening, folks. Zicha Franco, Emerald Jackie's Life Uncut Blog. Good evening, Giancarlo. Good evening, Joel Lacandola. Good evening, Sir Butch and Sir Itos. God bless at mabuhay ang katipon ng KDP. Ruben Franco, hello po, watching from Melbourne. One special network to subscribe is Right Side Broadcasting Network. Right Side Broadcasting. If you want to watch full coverage of Trump's rallies, I think Mr. Michael Billington needs some more researchings to do. How can he not know Dr. Shiva? Just saying, Mirasol Gloriani, good evening po, Sir Butch and Sir Itas. Alam niyo po, ako din, nakita ko na si Dr. Shiva kasi po mahilig tayo nag-YouTube, ganyan, ano? At alam natin, si Dr. Shiva meron siyang blog, no? At sinetap niya yung blog niya dahil nga may plano siyang tumakbong Senado sa Massachusetts, yata siya, no? At mukhang magaling po siya, hindi ko naman, kanya lang, iba po yung mga ganito, tumatakbong senador at iba din yung pinapag-usapan natin. Kaya bigyan natin ng konting sila Mike. Gloriani, Mirasol, good evening Sir Butch and Itos. Esteban Pagtakahan, good evening. Barumbado, good evening Sir Butch, and si Nards po ito. Oh, Nards. Eric Ortiz, good evening, Butch and Itos. Fatima UC, good evening po sa buhatan ng stream media. Ang ibang politiko kaya tahimik sila sa protector sila sa NPA at terorista. RJ Avellano, mabuhay sa'yo. Marie Rose Bentulan, mabuhay. Rod Voigt Pariabras, good evening KDP Sir Butch at Itos. Nanggigigil talaga ako sa media ng Pilipinas. Viral ngayon ng social media itong lumutang na dating kadre ng CPP, NPA, NDF na si Eric, hindi man lang naibabalita sa mga mainstream media pera-pera ang media ng Pilipinas watching you from Subic, Zambales. Ganyan talaga, we better realize that. Maski na dito sa Amerika, nakikita nyo yung mainstream media. Sinabi sa atin ng ating guest ngayon, talagang nagse-censorship sila. Pinipili nila kung ano yung lalabas at pinipigilan nilang makita ng tao yung tunay na sitwasyon. Kanina lang pinapag-usapan namin ni Itos, etong pinakahuling rally ni Trump sa Pennsylvania, nagdalo diyan 56,000 people, rally lang. Ibig sabihin, isang oras lang siya magsasalita doon, no? 56,000. Alam nyo, si Biden, pag-rally siya, ang number of people siguro 100, no? Walang biruan, hindi ko po inaano, pero ganyan talaga. Ayaw na ayaw. Ayaw na ayaw pakita ng mga media yung number of people dyan sa kanila. No?
Pero kasama po tayo, Rod White, no? Yung Periabas. Nangigigil din po kami sa media, dati pa. Kasi namimili sila. So the thing is to fight, to spread that. Kung sa viral media po, spread natin ng spread yan yung mga panlaban, because yung mga CPP, NPA at NDF kalaban po ng Republika yan.
Alam niyo, meron kayong mga Facebook accounts, di ba?
Kalat nyo
sa mga friends niyo, pati itong mga programa natin dito, no? Ikalat nyo sa kung sino man ang dahil ito ang panglaban natin sa mainstream media, itong social media. No?
Obvious na sila. Buti namumulat na yung kaisipan ng tao. No?
Let us not keep what we learn only in this channel or in our small group. We have to share it, no? And we have to pay it forward. Kung gusto nyo yung naririnig nyo at mayroon kayong magagandang balita, i-share nyo. Lalong-lalong po kayo yung mga ngayon, these days, these next 2-3 days, no? Try to contact your relatives and friends in the United States, no? And tell them how important it is that Trump wins this election. Important not just for them, but for the rest of the world, and that includes us, no? Nene, maming, magkakasama din po yan sila Trump, kunwari lang yan kasi ang agenda niya ay peace, din sa fake sa Europe, Israel, Iran po ang role niya, but worse, Biden representing Barack Obama. Pwede din po kung pero sinasabi niya, depende po sa kanyang pagtingin. Pero tama po kayo, grabe si Biden, no? Masama yan. Georgie Gonzaga, in 1946, Democrat Congress passed the Rescission Act, stripping Filipinos of the benefits they were promised in 1946. A racist law was passed and signed by Democrat President Truman, the Rescission Act of 1946. Democratic Party Majority Congress stripped Filipinos troops of the benefits they were promised, signed into law by Democrat President Harry S. Truman, February 18, 1946. These are the 250,000 Filipinos who served in World War II. As scouts, guerrillas, and enlisted soldiers in the Philippine Army, they were told they would get full benefits in exchange for putting their lives on the line, fighting side by side with the U.S. military. Tama po kayo dyan. Alam niyo po, napakalungkot yan. Yung presidente noon na nangako sa Pilipinas na itong 250,000 Filipinos who fought side by side with the American soldiers were going to get full benefits in exchange for putting their lives on the line. Tama po. The reason for that is, if you remember, in those days, we were still a colony of the United States. No? Because we were a colony and we are being invaded by the Japanese, no, we had to fight not just for our country, but we had to fight alongside the Americans. And the Americans recognized our role. Pero nung namatay siya, yung sumunod na presidente na napaka walang hiya, no, yan si Harry S. Truman. I say, walang hiyayan kasi pinilit niyang gamitin yung atomic bomb sa Hapon. Maski na yung Hapon sumusuko na, gusto niyang pumatay ng 500,000 Japanese para pakita sa mundo na meron silang sandata, meron silang nuclear bomb na panakot sa lahat. No? Pero ang pinatay niya doon, 500. Ito yung klaseng tao na sinabi niya sa Pilipino, no? Sa Filipino soldiers na kasama ng Amerikanong lumalaban sa Hapon, ang sinabi niya, kung gusto niyong mabayaran ng full benefits in exchange for putting your lives on the line, fighting side by side, bigyan niyo kayo ng full benefits, dapat i-abandon niyo ang demand niyo to become independent. Before, as early as 1936, there was already a Philippine independent movement. At nung nakausap nila si President Roosevelt, no, pumayag siya at sinabi niya, oo, ang gagawin natin, ipapakita natin sa mundo na ang naging colony ng Amerika ay mahusay at matatag at umuunlad. Ang problema natin, namatay si Roosevelt at ang sumunod ito, si Truman. At hindi niya sinunod yung pangako ni President Roosevelt. Thank you for bringing it up. Rosalinda Kanayama, takot po ba ang malalaking mainstream media sa mga rebeldeng grupo kasi tahimik sila sa sumabog na balita ni Ka Eric? Siguro, no? Alam mo na yung mainstream media, depende yan sa perang ibibigay sa kanila o kaya, the other thing, ang mainstream media, pag-aari ng mga oligarko yan. Na? Yung mga ABS-CBN, pag-aari ng Lopezes. Yung channel, CNN Philippines, Channel 5 ba yun? Channel 9 ay pag-aari ni Ramon Ang. Yung Channel 5, pag-aari ni Manny Pangilinan. At yung iba, meron mga iba-ibang oligarkong kasama. Now, yung mga oligarko, ayaw nilang lumalabas itong mga ganitong klaseng balita. Bakit? Kasi ang mga oligarko, ang isa sa mga sources of funds ng mga rebelding grupo. Hindi dahil kampi sila sa mga komunista, pero kinakailangan sa kanilang paningin, magkaroon sila ng pag-ugnayan dahil ang sinasabi ng mga komunista, pasasabugin namin yung mga transformers ninyo, yung mga tore ninyo, ganyan-ganyan, kung hindi kayo magbibigay ng pera sa amin. Ngayon, kung papayagan ng mga mainstream media, lumabas itong pinahayag ni Eric, magagalit ngayon yung mga rebelde sa mainstream media, soon sa mga may-ari sa kanila. At kilala ng mga rebelde kung sino-sino ang mga may-ari diyan sa mga television stations na yan. Kanya ayaw nila, baka magka-problema sila sa mga kaliwa. Ganyan po ang tingin ko dyan. No? So itong mga ganitong klaseng balita, malamang hindi nila ilalabas. Saan po pwede ilabas ito? Dito po sa social media at dapat ipahayag nyo sa lahat ng inyong mga Facebook friends. Jose Jr. Aquino, only Donald Trump is the one. Okay. You don't need this. Alfredo Oredina,
coup versus Trump is exposed by Senator ex-military Black, done by James Mattis, Colin Powell, etc. Jude military-industrial complex is affected when Trump wins. Trump is anti-war, drain the swamp. Mass arrest kaya di pa tapos si Trump. Pompeo is an ex-CIA and a deep state war freak. Trump and American citizens battling the deep state. Trump is pro-life, signed an act to protect unborn, newly born babies, and defund Planned Parenthood, selling fetus to Big Pharma and abortion. Correct.
Exactly.
Saravok Balspon. Smartmatic, you got it, sir. Ramon Gonzalez, laban ang mga oligarchs kay PRRD, kaya gamit ng mga tao nilang mamamahayag, hindi ibinabalita ang magandang ginawa ni PRRD. Lahat puro masama at pangit. Magkakampi oligarchs. Dilawan at komunista laban kay PRRD at Pilipinas.
Tama ka diyan, Ramon Gonzalez. Kanya lang, alam niyo po, matagal nang pinapahayag ng presidente na itong mga oligarko, ang pinakamalaking korupsyon na nangyayari sa gawa ng oligarko sa mga public utilities. Yung mga nakaw na ginagawa nila sa tubig, sa kuryente, ay napakalaki. Minumura po ng presidente yan sa kanyang mga pahayag. Ngunit ang nangyayari naman, hanggang doon na lang po tayong naririnig natin, minumura niya. Pero wala siyang ginagawang hakbang para buwagin ang mga oligarko dito sa mga public utilities. Ito pong pagbabayad natin sa kuryente, siya po ang pinakamahal na bayad sa kuryente sa buong mundo. Mas mataas po ang binabayaran natin sa kuryente diyan sa mga Australia, diyan sa Amerika, sa Hapon. Mas mahal pa po tayo diyan, no? Pero anong ginagawa po ng ating Pangulo? Sa palagay ko, para siyang natatakot dito sa mga oligarko. Kinakailangan tulungan natin siya at palakasin natin ang loob niya. At ang ginagawa po ng KDP, kasama na rin ang mga iba-ibang mga organisasyon, napakarami na pong sumasapi sa atin, ay maghahayag po kami ng isang dadalhin po namin sa Korte Suprema itong pagbibigay ng mandamus sa ating presidente. Ibig sabihin dyan, ihingin natin sa Korte Suprema na sabihin sa ating presidente na tignan niya ang ating saligang batas sa Article 12 at saka Section 17 and 18. Ito pong saligang batas natin, itong section na ito at itong artikulong ito, ay nagbibigay ng kapangyarihan sa ating Pangulo na pagdating, sabi niya, ng isang krisis, na malawakang krisis, apektado ang buhay ng mga mamayang Pilipino. Dapat magkaroon tayong state of emergency, tapos akuin ng gobyerno ang lahat ng public utilities, no, habang may krisis, at pag inako niya, aakuin niya galing sa oligarko. Kukunin niya. No? Bakit niya aakuin? Siyempre, ang intensyon niyan ay pababaan ang halaga ng sinisingil sa taong bayan. Itong mataas na sinisingil sa atin, kayang-kaya pong hatiin yan, no? At mapapaandar pa rin natin lahat itong mga ating sa kuryente at sa tubig at sa mga telecom at lahat pa, no? Maski kalahati lang ang tatanggalin. No? Yan ang sasabihin po natin. Dahil ito ang tamang paraan na nasa ating saligang batas na gawin niya kung totoo na gusto niyang tulungan ang taong bayan. Buti sinabi mo to, no, Ramon Gonzalez, dahil gusto namin talaga, iisa lang ang ating Pangulo, si President Rodrigo Duterte. At sa lahat ng ginagawa niya, na hindi niya, nagagawa niya na lahat, pero isang napaka-importanting gawin niya para makatulong sa taong bayan at para maiayos ang ating ekonomiya para papunta sa kaunlaran, ay itong Article 12, Section 17 at 18. Hindi po siya magde-declare ng revolusyon. Hindi po siya magma-martial law. Ito lang po ang gagawin niya. May aayos na niya po ang buhay natin lahat. Ayos niya ang ating ekonomiya papunta sa kaunlaran. That's what we're going to ask the President. Sige, Allen.
Pesloned. Para lang Ferdinand Marcos yung nangyari kay Trump. Marami talagang demonyo. Pagdasal natin na huwag silang maghari ng mundo. Dahil maubos yung lahi natin. From Santa Mesa, mabuhay po kayo mga Katipunero. Lucky Lynn de la Cruz. Hello po Sir Butch at kasama nyo. Maging ang FB po, kinokontrol din nilang mga mag-post related po sa politika. Nabablock o na FB jail din po ang mga account. Watching from St. Petersburg City, Russia. Ruth Binongkal, God bless po. Good evening, Butch and Ito, stay safe. Motion Science, God bless you po. Cesar Sobran, when the likes of Mike Billington speaks, world politics gets a human face. Enlightening to the cause of humanity for peace and progress. The world would be really different had the minds like LaRouche had the chance to read the world. Correct?
We agree with you, sir. Agree. Yeah. Okay, hanggang dyan na lang po tayo. Nintay ko yung spiel. Ang alam po ng ating mga katipon dito sa ating katipunan at ang mga magagaling na staff ng DCXL Radio, yung mga dahil meron po tayong link up sa kanila, kami po ay pansamantalang nagpapaalam at nagpapasalamat na sinumayan nyo kami ngayon. Ang ora de peligro ng ating bayan at ng buong mundo dito po sa ating katipunan. Hanggang sa linggo pong muli mga katipon, 7 to 9 p.m. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.